There are a number of key differences between an average speech and a really good speech. And one of these key elements is how you organize your presentation, and more particularly, how you create an introduction and a conclusion. There are a lot of examples of speeches where when we watch them, this is one of the reasons why I want you to watch a lot of speeches as part of this class, famous speeches or speeches that have been redone for us. And you can tell that the writer and the speaker were very intentional about how they went about introducing and closing their speech. Sometimes it's not even all that noticeable, which makes it in some ways more powerful. For the purposes of this class, it's okay to be quite obvious about it. This is part of the point, is we're learning how to create a presentation and deliver a presentation in a way that has impact. So the way you want to create your speech is almost like a reverse hourglass, but the reason I use the hourglass image here is because the conclusion and the introduction are really, really the key pieces here. Yes, you need to deliver important content in the main body of the speech, but how you begin and how you end can either make or break the success of your presentation. So the introduction and the conclusion really are a way to frame your speech. They're, so that you've got, if you can imagine, a photograph inside a frame. A photograph looks great, but when you provide the right kind of framing, it changes the image completely. So you want to start with a purposeful, thought out, intentional opening. So more than just, hey, hi, this is my presentation. Think about how you want to introduce your topic to your audience. Now, I understand when we go to deliver it, and it comes your turn to deliver your speech on Zoom, you're going to be, you're going to have to make sure your mic's working, all that kind of stuff. And so I understand you're not going to, start at 100 miles an hour. But once you've kind of gathered yourself and you actually begin your presentation, you will have rehearsed it enough to where you have, and you will have written the content, outlined the content in such a way that you are very specific about how you're going to start. And then, after you've delivered the main content of your presentation, how you close is equally important. That's what people are going to remember. And so typically in a 5 to 7 minute presentation, your introduction is going to be give or take 60 seconds. Your main body is going to be, say, give or take 4 minutes. And then the conclusion is another 60 seconds or so. These are really, really key to delivering a really, really strong presentation, whether it's an informative presentation, a persuasive presentation, whatever it is for this class. This basic structure is how we're going to go forward. Okay, so I have borrowed a lot of material directly from the textbook because it outlines the introduction process really well. So I want you to make sure to go in and read the chapter on organizing your presentation, your speech in the textbook. This is really just a summary and an overview. So as I said before, introduction typically lasts for a 5 to 7 minute presentation, give or take about a minute. And there are ways to start it where you can get your audience's attention. And it doesn't require that you are dramatic or that you yell at your audience or that you have a hilarious joke. All those things are, they may have their place. Some speakers are better at using humor, some speakers are better at other kinds of things, and some presentations suit themselves for a certain kind of opening. So, you can start with a personal anecdote. You can start with a startling fact or statement. Did you know? That's sort of a rhetorical question. You can use a quotation, whether it's a famous one or not. I will warn you. Do your homework on, if you're going to use a well-known quotation, do your homework. A lot of quotations floating around the internet are either not attributed to the right person or they are taken out of context. So do your research. You can make reference to a news event. So these are the kinds of things that you can use to open your presentation. If you decide to try humor, a couple of things. One, make sure it's funny. Delivering things in a funny way is a bit of an art, and not everybody can do it. And as my wife often tells me, when I think I'm funny, she just looks at me and shakes her head. Like, no, not funny. Also make sure that the topic of your presentation is appropriate for humor, and that the humor that you use makes sense, that it helps set up the rest of the presentation. You also want to, toward the end of your introduction, you want to establish credibility. This is where you want to identify some research you've done, or in some way provide evidence that you know what you're talking about. You can talk about how long you've done something and how you're experienced in it for the purposes of this class. That is really great, but not quite enough, because we want you to then add to that additional research that supports your what you come to the topic with, and in some way try to establish rapport with your audience in some fashion by identifying with them in some way. And then as you get toward the end of your introduction, you want to essentially introduce your thesis statement and provide a preview of where you're headed. In the main body, and I'm going to spend less time on this than the introduction and the conclusion, simply because that's what this is about, is the introduction and conclusion. But in the main body of your presentation, it's going to be about 4 minutes, give or take, and you're going to use your research. You're going to make 2 or 3 main points. You're going to provide some kind of transition between each point, and then you're going to identify that you're about to wrap it up. This is a signal to your audience. Oh, okay. This is nearing the end. I want to pay particular attention here. We'll talk more about content and delivery and such things in other lessons, so I'm not going to spend a lot of time on the 4 minute middle part of your presentation. And then the conclusion. And there are a lot of ways to do it, but you want to be intentional about finishing off. Too many times, so when I was a journalist and when I was an editor, I would often say to young writers and young journalists in particular who would ask me, so how should I finish my story? And I would say, well, with a period. It's hilarious, right? See, my wife was right. I think I'm funny when I'm not. But seriously, the reason for that is, in journalism, if you're writing news, you don't necessarily need to bring it all together at the end. It may just make sense to just, when you've delivered all the information that you have in a meaningful way, in a way that is meaningful to your audience, just stop. I mean, there are times, and really good journalists can do this, when they wrap it all up with a significant conclusion. But in this case, it's absolutely essential that you bring everything together, you restate in some fashion, and no, you don't have to use the same words again, but just in some way reiterate the main message and the main thesis statement of your presentation, and then some kind of conclusion. You can offer a challenge. You can offer, you can use a quotation of some kind. You can even go back and, if you started with a quotation or you used one in the middle, you can go back and use it again. And hopefully at this point, it kind of makes more sense because you've provided additional context. You can project the future, if this, then that. You can try to finish with an inspirational conclusion or a warning. So on these two, understand that if you're doing an informative presentation, you're not trying to persuade people. And so be careful about crossing over the line from informative to persuasive. And there is additional information in other lessons and in the textbook on the difference between those two. You can pose a question. You can finish with an anecdote or a personal story. There are a lot of ways, but make sure that you've thought about how you're going to end. Too often, we get to the end of a presentation and we haven't really thought it through, and it's like, okay, you all don't know I'm done now, and so I kind of have to say, that's all. Well, we need to conclude in a way where it's obvious that we've delivered our message, we have come to the conclusion, and it's obvious to all parties.